Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take a stack of sources, boil them down, and pull out the most important, surprising, and useful insights just for you.
Yep, that's what we do.
Today, we're plunging into a topic that seems simple, maybe even a little cozy. Ignorance. We often think of it as just, well, not knowing something. End of story.
Or maybe that old saying, ignorance is bliss.
Right, but our sources suggest it's way, way more complex than that.
They certainly do. We've gathered a really interesting mix here. There's a philosophical paper that digs deep into what factual ignorance really is.
And it argues it's less about lacking knowledge or true beliefs.
And more about a lack of awareness, which sounds simple, but it changes things.
How it changes how we think about responsibility, maybe.
Exactly. Then we got a piece looking at ignorance in practice, specifically in applied behavior analysis, dealing with cultural diversity.
Okay.
And it tackles this thorny issue of blind spots. You know, the things we literally don't know we don't know.
Oh, yeah. And how ethical codes try to handle that, but maybe struggle sometimes.
That's the idea. Plus, we'll weigh in on that ignorance is bliss, saying, see what philosophy and maybe even some online chatter thinks.
And then circle back.
Yeah, circle back to see how cultivating personal character, like virtue, might actually help us navigate all this, this complex stuff around our own ignorance.
Okay, so our mission today is to unpack these different layers, go beyond the simple definitions, see how ignorance hits ethics and responsibility.
Explore those tricky blind spots.
Yeah, and figure out what it all means for us, you know, and how we approach learning and acting ethically in our lives, our work.
Sounds good. Let's dive in. So when philosophers look at ignorance, what's the traditional starting point?
Well, the Ignorance and Awareness paper says the two big views see factual ignorance as either the absence of knowledge or the absence of true belief. Pretty intuitive, right? If you don't know it, you're ignorant. If you don't truly believe it, you're ignorant.
Seems straightforward. But the paper says these definitions hit some snags, some puzzles.
They do. Think about their example, Joyce. She's got these official reports, population sizes for Mexico and Myanmar. She knows those numbers.
Okay.
And based only on that, she deduces that Mexico has more people than Myanmar. She works it out logically.
Right. She uses the info she has to figure out something new.
Exactly. And the argument is, at the very moment she finishes that deduction, she stops being ignorant of that fact that Mexico's population is bigger.
Even if she hasn't quite, processed it fully, hasn't formed the solid belief yet.
That's the point. Forming the belief might take a bit longer. It's a separate step that comes after she's already worked it out and is technically no longer ignorant.
Okay. So she's not ignorant anymore, but maybe doesn't fully believe it yet. That does mess with the absence of true belief idea.
It really challenges it. If you can stop being ignorant before you truly believe something, then ignorance can't just be the absence of true belief. And this leads the paper to push for this alternative view, which they defend pretty systematically. Factual ignorance is actually the absence of awareness.
Awareness? Okay, that feels different, more natural maybe, like saying, I just wasn't aware of that.
Exactly. And the paper points out our language kind of hints at this. Is ignorant of and is aware of, they work the same way grammatically.
Oh, interesting.
You can be ignorant of a person or ignorant of the heat from a stove or ignorant of the fact that something's true, and aware of fits right into all those slots perfectly.
So semantically, they seem like opposites. Ignorant versus aware.
Feels like a better fit. So if ignorance is the lack of awareness, what exactly is awareness then? Is it just another word for knowing?
Well, the paper looks at a couple of philosophical ideas about awareness. One view connects it to being in a position to know.
A position to know, like you're set up for it.
Sort of.
Yeah.
It means all the sort of impersonal conditions for knowledge are met. You have the evidence, it's reliable, it points to the truth. Everything's there, epistemically available, even if you haven't personally clicked believe yet.
Okay, so the setup is right. Maybe just waiting for the personal uptick?
Right. And another view defines awareness as having a suitably non-accidental true representation of the fact.
Non-accidental true representation. Okay, break that down.
Think about seeing a red ball in good light. You're seeing it creates this mental state. It seems true that the ball is red. That seeming is a representation of the fact.
Got it.
And because the conditions are normal, that representation isn't just a lucky guess or a fluke, it's non-accidental. It reliably reflects the reality of the red ball.
So awareness is about the truth reliably getting into your mental system, not by accident.
Pretty much. And here's the key thing both views agree on. If you know something, you are definitely aware of it. Knowledge implies awareness.
But not the other way around.
Right. You can be aware of something without fully knowing it, mainly because knowledge usually requires that belief step, and awareness on these views might happen just before or without belief solidifying.
Which takes us right back to Joyce and her deduction.
Exactly.
She becomes aware of the population difference through the reliable process of deduction, even if the belief takes a moment longer. The deduction puts her in that position to know, or creates that non-accidental representation.
It shows how reasoning itself can be a source of awareness.
Okay, this whole awareness versus ignorance thing, it feels like it must have big consequences for how we think about responsibility.
It really does. A basic idea in ethics, which the paper highlights, is that being ignorant of a key fact can sometimes excuse you, right? Especially if knowing that fact would have given you a really strong reason to act differently.
Yeah, like not knowing the path is icy means you're less to blame if you slip, compared to knowing and just being careless.
That's the intuition. The paper uses this example of fearful Flo. Flo has this irrational fear she thinks there's a fire every single time she smells smoke.
Okay, a bit extreme.
Yeah. So one day, she smells smoke from a candle, her phobia kicks in, she thinks fire, and just by sheer coincidence, there's an actual unrelated fire nearby.
Wow, okay.
Now, the fact of that real fire is definitely a reason to act. Call for help. Warn people.
But her belief about a fire isn't connected to the real fire. It's just her phobia and the candle smoke.
Precisely. Her connection to the truth of the actual fire is purely accidental. The paper argues the awareness view explains why we feel Flo isn't responsible for failing to act on the actual fire fact.
Because she wasn't truly aware of it.
Right. Being aware under those definitions we talked about, position to know and non-accidental representation, is incompatible with being only accidentally connected to the fact. Since her connection was accidental, the awareness view says she was ignorant of the real fire fact, even though she happened to have a true belief, and therefore she isn't responsible.
That's neat. It helps sort out those weird cases where someone believes something true but for totally the wrong reasons. This link between awareness, ignorance, responsibility, it seems super relevant for professional ethics.
Absolutely. And that source on applied behavior analysis, ABA, and cultural diversity really brings this home. It points out this growing awareness within the ABA field about needing to handle cultural diversity better.
Which is showing up in their ethics code.
Yeah, the code's been updated. It now explicitly says practitioners have obligations around diversity, like responding to diverse needs and contexts, including diversity in training, being aware of your own biases.
So they're spelling it out.
They are. They list specific things to consider: age, disability, ethnicity, gender identity, immigration status that one's relatively new, apparently race, religion, socioeconomic status. Quite a list.
And this ties into culpable ignorance, right? The idea that sometimes you should have known better.
Exactly. Culpable ignorance is when you're ethically on the hook for not knowing something you had a duty to know. Like in any profession, you're expected to know your ethics code, know your limits, your scope of competence.
Ignoring those isn't just an oops, it's an ethical breach because it affects people, clients, patients, their autonomy, their dignity.
Right. And by putting these cultural diversity obligations in the code, the ABA profession is basically saying, look, being ignorant about these specific responsibilities can be culpable now. You have a professional duty to be aware.
It sets a minimum standard for awareness.
It does. But, and this is where it gets really challenging, the ABA paper goes beyond just not knowing stuff you could look up. It talks about the things we do not know we do not know.
Ah, the blind spots. That sounds difficult.
It is. Because it's not just a gap you're aware of, it's a gap you don't even see. Like the blind spot in your car mirror, theoretically it could be there, but you can't perceive what's in it directly. Which means you don't even realize there's anything to perceive.
And the case studies in that paper really show this, like Kima's case, the co-sleeping one.
Yeah, the source calls that one a more straightforward example of culpable ignorance. The behavior analyst didn't really consider the family's cultural acceptance of co-sleeping.
They just pushed their own view.
It seems like they assumed their idea of sleep autonomy was universal, maybe didn't check their own bias there. And the code does say to consider diverse contexts. So ignoring that specific cultural context, which impacted the family, fell into culpable ignorance because it disregarded an explicit ethical point.
Okay. What about Victor? The toilet training case with the Native American family.
That one leans more towards the blind spot issue, according to the paper. The analysts knew how to do toilet training, but they prioritized it, framing it as a universal need maybe beyond culture.
Without checking if it was the family's top priority.
Or fully exploring if the method they chose, extinction, which can be aversive, really fit with the family's values or cultural comfort level. The potential blind spot there was maybe twofold: ignorance of the family's specific values and maybe unawareness of how the analyst's own cultural background shaped what they saw as an objective scientific priority.
Right. And the last case,
Chi's case really nails the blind spot problem. The analysts actually thought they were being culturally competent. They'd worked with the general culture before, they reflected on biases.
They tried to do the right thing.
They did. But they missed subtle, crucial cultural nuances. Things like specific greetings, understanding hierarchy, the role of prayer, how stimming might be viewed differently. They lacked the tools, perhaps, to even know what to look for at that finer level. They were ignorant of these nuances, and crucially, unaware of the gaps in their own awareness for that specific family.
Wow. So it sounds like maybe the ethics code itself makes assumptions. Like it assumes we can become aware of our biases if we just try hard enough.
That's what the paper suggests. It calls it a logic of mastery, the idea that we can control ethical behavior by knowing the rules. But it argues this doesn't fully capture how cultural differences or other areas of ignorance might just not register. They fly under the radar, often without any bad intent.
Which brings up responsibility again. If you genuinely don't know you have a blind spot, how responsible are you?
It's a tough question, but the paper makes a really important point here. Tackling this kind of ignorance, especially cultural blind spots, isn't just on the individual practitioner.
It's a system thing.
Yes, the whole profession education programs, supervisors, researchers, they share the responsibility. They need to provide better training, better tools, maybe different ways of thinking to help people become aware of potential blind spots and develop the skills to navigate them. It's both personal effort and structural support.
That really changes the frame. It's not just about individual failing, but about the support system needed to help people see better.
Okay, thinking about all this, the complexity, the hidden parts, it brings me back to ignorance is bliss. Any truth to it at all? Well, the sources definitely chew on this. That RSIS paper notes that in epistemology, the study of knowledge, ignorance is bliss, doesn't really fly. Ignorance is usually seen as bad, maybe a necessary malevolence sometimes, but not good.
Not exactly blissful, then.
Not from a knowledge-seeking perspective. However, the paper does mention an interesting idea. Ignorance can sometimes have epistemic value, value related to knowledge.
How can not knowing help with knowing? Seems counterintuitive.
By being the spark, ignorance fuels curiosity. It drives inquiry. It highlights the gaps we need to fill. Think of a scientist hunting for a cure. Their ignorance of the cure is what motivates all the hard work.
Or like in those ABA cases, realizing, uh-oh, I don't understand this cultural piece, is the first step to seeking more information, right?
Exactly. Recognizing ignorance can be the crucial first step toward learning.
Okay, so maybe value as a motivator. What about just psychologically? Does it feel good sometimes not to know?
The sources acknowledge this, definitely. Ignorance can provide psychological comfort, not dwelling on awful truths like our own mortality maybe, or just filtering out the endless stream of information to avoid overload. That kind of selective ignorance can feel easier.
A temporary personal kind of bliss, maybe?
Perhaps. But the downside is often poor decisions, especially long-term. And when you scale it up to society,
Yeah, then it's rarely bliss.
almost never. The sources point to serious societal harm. Political ignorance makes democracy harder, leaves people open to manipulation. And then there's intentional ignorance. Powerful groups deliberately hiding information.
Like the tobacco industry hiding cancer risks, or governments maybe downplaying threats.
Exactly. That's not just accidental ignorance. It's manufactured ignorance used for control, and it causes real, preventable harm.
And ignorance can be used to keep certain groups down, right? Denying access to knowledge keeps power structures in place. Epistemic inequity, they call it.
Yes. So while you or I might find a moment's peace by ignoring something stressful, the big picture societal effects of ignorance are pretty devastating. The sources also come back strongly to the value of truth. Even that Reddit source makes a pragmatic case. Seeking truth is basic for survival. For progress, science, medicine, technology all depend on it.
It's presented almost like a core human drive.
It is, although there's that counterpoint to facing hard truths as, well, hard. Sometimes people prefer comfortable illusions.
Which circles back to the complexity. Truth matters, but facing it isn't always easy. Ignorance is complicated. accidental, willful, sometimes totally invisible.
It really is.
So if we accept that ignorance includes these blind spots we can't easily see and just trying harder by ourselves isn't the whole answer, how do we navigate this? How do we aim for better awareness, more responsible action? This seems like where virtue ethics might come in.
Right. Our source from Revista's USP brings in virtue ethics. It's the oldest approach to moral philosophy, think Plato, Aristotle, and it shifts the question. Instead of, what rules should I follow, or what's the best outcome, it asks.
What kind of person should I be?
Exactly. It's all about cultivating moral character, the virtues.
Building the person, not just judging the action.
And while other ethical theories became more dominant later, virtue ethics stuck around longer and feels like medicine. Thinkers identified key virtues needed for good clinical practice.
Like what?
Things like compassion, fidelity, justice, courage, integrity. And a really key one they mentioned is prudence.
Prudence. Practical wisdom. How does that connect to dealing with ignorance?
Prudence is presented as crucial. It's the ability to take your technical knowledge, understand the specifics of the situation, including the patient's values, the inherent uncertainty, and make a sound, ethically good judgment.
So it's not just about knowing facts, but having the character trait to apply knowledge wisely, especially when things are messy or you don't have all the answers, like when you suspect a blind spot.
That's the idea. A prudent person can navigate ambiguity better. And virtue ethics isn't just about meeting the minimum standard, like just following the law or the code. It aims for excellence.
Hitting the target, acting well in all situations, not just avoiding trouble.
Right. It's a higher aim. And interestingly, the source also notes that patients need virtues too. Honesty, trust for the whole relationship to work well.
Okay, so how does cultivating these virtues actually help us face our ignorance and blind spots?
Well, think about prudence. It equips you for wise judgment in the face of uncertainty or incomplete knowledge. Courage might give you the strength to question your own assumptions or challenge a standard practice if it doesn't feel right in a specific context, which is vital for uncovering blind spots.
And humility seems huge here, right? Especially after that ABA discussion, acknowledging you don't know everything, especially across cultures.
Absolutely critical. Humility opens you up to learning, to feedback, to realizing you need different tools or perspectives to see what you're missing. Integrity pushes you to strive for that ethical excellence, even when it means admitting ignorance or confronting uncomfortable truths about your own limitations.
So virtue ethics gives us a different angle. It suggests focusing on developing the kind of person who is inherently better equipped through their character to grapple with ignorance, spot blind spots, and aim for truly ethical action that's more than just rule following.
Yeah, it shifts the focus. Less, did I break a rule? And more, did I act with the wisdom, awareness, and integrity required for excellence in this situation, given what I knew and what I might not have known?
This has been quite a deep dive. We started by challenging that simple idea of ignorance as just not knowing.
Right, reframing it as a lack of awareness.
And realizing that includes those really tricky blind spots, the unknown unknowns. We saw how that impacts responsibility, how it plays out in real-world ethics like in ABA.
Highlighting the limits of just relying on codes and the need for system-level support, too.
Then we wrestled with ignorance is bliss, landing on maybe some temporary personal comfort, but mostly seeing the vital importance of seeking truth, despite the challenges.
And finally, exploring virtue ethics, cultivating character traits like prudence, humility, courage, not just as ideals, but as practical tools for navigating the complexities of our own knowledge and ignorance.
It suggests a path towards becoming the kind of person better able to see and address their own limitations.
Striving for that ethical excellence.
So let's leave you, our listener, with this thought. If ignorance often involves a lack of awareness, including blind spots we struggle to see alone, what specific virtues or practices could you focus on cultivating to become more aware of what you might be missing? In your work, in your life. How does thinking about striving for excellence through virtue change how you view your own knowledge, and maybe more importantly, your own ignorance?